Her head snapped back so hard, the sound of hair tearing from her scalp echoed in the golden dining hall. Serafina's jeweled hand still gripped the strands, her smile wide and cruel. Guests froze mid-bite, forks suspended, their eyes darting between the billionaire's wife and the sister who had just yanked her like a rag doll. Maribel did not scream. She sat trembling, her eyes glistening, but her lips sealed. The silence was deafening. And then, just as whispers rippled through the crowd, an even harsher blow landed. Dante Moretti, the patriarch himself, shifted in his chair, and with the cold ease of a man who had never known restraint, kicked her beneath the table. The thud echoed louder than the music. People gasped. A woman covered her mouth, a man's wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. And there Maribel sat, bent from pain, her dignity bleeding out for all to witness. The glittering chandeliers above seemed to mock her with their brilliance. She was nothing but a maid who had married into their empire, and now she was being reminded of it before the world. Some guests turned away, too cowardly to watch. Others leaned forward, hungry for scandal. But what froze every eye in the room was not her pain. It was the figure rising slowly from the head of the table. Cassian Moretti, the billionaire CEO, the man whose word could collapse markets, stood to his full height, his gaze locked on the two people he once called family. Before I take you deeper, let me ask, HI viewers, kindly tell US where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Now lean in, because what Cassian did next would leave the air colder than ice and the entire hall terrified to breathe. You see, power isn't just about money. It's about silence, timing, and the one move no one expects. Cassian had always tolerated whispers, tolerated rumors, tolerated the sideways glances that came when he chose a maid as his bride. But tonight he was done being silent. His hands tightened at his sides, and the table, polished wood worth more than most houses, shook as he pressed against it. Maribel lifted her eyes, swollen and wet, and in that look, he saw not just his wife, but the woman who had once wiped spilled wine from a hotel floor without complaint, who had smiled at him when everyone else bowed. She had saved him from his loneliness. And now, before the eyes of 100 powerful men and women, she was being destroyed. Cassian's voice, when it came, was low, sharp as a blade. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to silence a room. But before I tell you the words that left his father pale and his sister frozen in her chair, let me ask you, dear listener, if you were Cassian, would you choose blood or love in that moment? Which would matter more? The family that raised you, or the one person who stood by you when no one else would? Cassian turned, his eyes burning. And then, he opened his mouth. The silence after the slap was heavier than the blow itself. Her cheek burned red, her hair still tangled in the fingers of the woman who yanked it, yet no one moved to help her. All eyes shifted to the man who had just raised his hand against his own daughter-in-law. A father's hand. A billionaire's pride. A tyrant's weapon. Elira's knees wobbled, but she didn't fall. She swallowed the ache, pressing her palm to the side of her face, her lips trembling, not from weakness, but from the battle to hold her voice still. That room, filled with polished marble, chandeliers, and the faint scent of roses, suddenly felt like a courtroom without mercy. The jury sat at the dinner table, whispering behind silver cutlery, waiting to see if she would shatter. But the person everyone expected to break her wasn't her father-in-law, nor the sister-in-law who yanked her hair with such venom. No, everyone knew the one whose word weighed heavier than gold was the man seated at the head of the table. Her husband. The billionaire heir whose decisions could make or unmake fortunes with a single signature. And when his chair scraped against the marble floor, when his hand lifted, not to strike but to gesture, the entire room froze. Would he defend her? Would he abandon her? Or worse, would he stay silent? The pause stretched so long it pressed on everyone's ribs. In that fragile breath, Elira understood the danger of silence. It could be worse than a slap. Worse than an insult. Silence meant consent. And if he chose silence now, her place in this family would be nothing more than a servant's shadow. Yet when his lips parted, the words that spilled were neither silence nor defense. They were fire, and they scorched deeper than anyone expected. "Enough," he said, his voice low but sharp as broken glass. "Every hand raised against her, every insult thrown, will not be forgotten." The room went still, but not with relief. No, the stillness was fear. The kind that crawls under your skin, whispering that a storm is coming, and no umbrella in the world can shield you. Because it wasn't just a husband's warning. It was a billionaire's promise. And in his world, promises always came with a price. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Elira lifted her eyes, stunned. She hadn't expected him to choose her side. Not here, not in front of the ones who always treated her as less. For a flicker of a second, hope warmed her chest. But she knew this family too well. For every defense came a backlash. For every shield, a sharper sword. Her sister-in-law scoffed, releasing Elira's hair as though it carried poison. "She's bewitched you," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "A maid who cleaned our floors now sits at our table and dares to think she's worthy of you. She doesn't belong in this house, and you know it." The father-in-law's face hardened. His eyes, steel-gray, unyielding, shifted from his son to Elira, then back again. "Son," he said, his voice heavy with control, "wealth has blinded you. She was born beneath us. You disgrace your mother's legacy by allowing this girl to tarnish our name." Elira's heart pounded, each word slicing deeper. She wanted to scream, to remind them she had dignity, dreams, blood that ran red just like theirs. But in families like this, truth was not spoken, it was bargained. Her husband leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, gaze sweeping over each accusing face. "Funny," he murmured, a dangerous calm in his tone. "You speak of legacy. Yet what kind of legacy is it when cruelty reigns at this table? When power is used to humiliate instead of protect?" Every word sent shivers down the spine of those listening. Because it was no longer just about Elira, it was about the cracks in their empire. A family built on reputation could not afford cracks, and his words were chiseling away at their marble facade. Elira sat silent, but inside her, emotions clashed like thunderclouds. Gratitude warred with suspicion. Did he defend her because he loved her, or because it served him in ways she could not yet see? In this world, love and strategy were never far apart. The sister-in-law's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this," she whispered, venom curling around her words like smoke. "She will drag you down, and when she does, we won't be here to lift you back up." Elira turned to her husband, searching his face for an answer, for any sign of truth behind his defense. But what she found wasn't comfort. It was calculation. His jaw clenched, his eyes unreadable, as though he were weighing not love, but consequences. And for the first time, Elira wondered if she was not just his wife, but his weapon. What he did next would prove it. The clink of his glass against the table echoed like a gavel. He rose slowly, commanding the room without raising his voice. "This family," he said, "will learn to respect my wife. Or it will learn the cost of disrespect. Choose wisely." No one spoke. No one dared breathe. Even the chandeliers above seemed to tremble in the silence. But Elira's heart raced, not from relief but from dread. For behind those words, she heard something else, something colder. This was not just about protecting her. This was about declaring war. And wars always left scars. Tell me, friends, if you were in Elira's place, would you trust his defense, or fear the hidden cost behind it? The night was colder than usual, and the city lights shimmered like restless stars scattered across the skyline. In that hush of silence, only broken by the hum of traffic below, the air felt heavy with secrets. I remember that moment clearly, because it was the first time the truth about family, betrayal, and justice began to peel itself open like a wound that had been hidden too long. And right in the middle of it all stood her, trembling yet unbroken, the maid everyone thought invisible, until the day her quiet strength became the one thing keeping a powerful dynasty from collapsing. But let me not run too far ahead of myself. What matters most here is what she heard that night. For sometimes, what slips into our ears when we are least expected to listen can change everything. She wasn't looking for trouble, no. Trouble found her. And once it did, she could never return to the safe shadow she once lived in. In the private mansion kitchen, the smell of polished marble mixed with the faint perfume of lilies carried down from the upper halls. She had finished her duties hours earlier, yet something told her to stay, to move quietly past the walls that had always silenced her. Upstairs, voices rose, not just any voices, but the one she feared most. The sister's sharp laughter, the father's thunderous scolding, and then a sudden silence so thick it made her blood race. She tiptoed closer, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. From behind the heavy mahogany door, she could make out words that felt like blades cutting through the night. They weren't just angry words, they were words soaked in cruelty. The sister yanked her hair earlier, the father had kicked her like she was less than human, but now, listening through that door, she realized something much darker was being planned. A plan that didn't just threaten her dignity. It threatened lives. She pressed her ear closer, the wood cool against her cheek, every syllable vibrating through her bones. They spoke of money, power, and a deal that could topple everything the billionaire husband had worked for. And more than that, they spoke of how to silence her permanently. She wasn't meant to survive in their world. But fate, ah yes, fate has its own way of turning tables. And justice, though often late, sometimes arrives in whispers before it thunders in the open. Her breath shook as she stepped back from the door. Every instinct told her to run, to leave the mansion, to vanish into the night and never return. But then she remembered the look in his eyes, the billionaire husband. The way he had frozen in that room, shocked by what his own family had done to her. That flicker of something in his gaze told her he might not be her enemy after all. And maybe, just maybe, saving him was the only way to save herself. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Now, you may think courage always comes with grand speeches or fiery storms. But that's not true. Sometimes courage is as quiet as a maid standing alone in a hallway, deciding whether to keep walking or to turn back and risk everything. She chose the latter. And that decision would ignite the storm none of them were prepared to face. She crept back into the kitchen, mind racing, fingers trembling as she gripped the edge of the counter. Every sound around her felt louder, the ticking clock, the whirring of the fridge, the faint rustle of curtains in the draft. But louder than them all was the question pulsing in her head. How much did he already know? And what would he do if she told him the rest? For when men of power are deceived by those closest to them, their reaction is never predictable. Some crumble, some explode, and a rare few grow colder than ice. She did not yet know which kind he was. She only knew that once she spoke, there would be no going back. And so, as the night stretched deeper and the mansion grew quiet again, she made her choice. She would find him. She would tell him. Not tomorrow, not later, now. Because the kind of poison his family was plotting didn't only come in a glass of wine. It came in lies, betrayal, and silence. When she finally stepped into the hall to search for him, her body shivered from more than the cold. Her steps echoed faintly, and with each echo, a memory of her mother's words returned to her, "Truth may not feed you today, but it will guard your soul tomorrow." And in that moment she understood. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for her soul. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that someone else had been listening from the shadows too. And that person had their own plan, one that would flip everything upside down before dawn. The storm outside had not yet ended when the mansion finally grew quiet. But inside those stone walls, silence did not mean peace. Silence meant secrets waiting to rise, and the poor maid, bruised in spirit but not yet broken, could feel it pressing against her chest as she folded sheets in the dim corridor. Every corner whispered with the echo of what had happened the day before, his sister yanking her hair, his father kicking her to the floor, and the billionaire husband watching with eyes that revealed nothing but carried the weight of everything. She pressed her palm to her ribs where the boot had landed, not from pity for herself, but from the stubborn memory of dignity she still carried. For a maid in a house that wasn't hers, dignity was a dangerous possession. It kept her from collapsing, but it also painted her as a threat to those who thought they owned her place in this world. Still, she carried it, because it was all she had, and because she believed that no matter how the powerful behaved, justice never slept forever. Late into the night she heard the clink of glass and the uneven steps of the billionaire husband walking alone in the grand hall. Something in his gait was unsteady, too heavy, too lost. She dared a glance from the shadows. His hand dragged along the polished rail of the staircase as if he needed its strength to keep from falling, his other hand clutching a glass of untouched bourbon. His eyes were not cruel, not like his sister's nor like his father's. His eyes seemed to be searching for a way out of a cage no one else could see. That moment burned in her memory, because it told her this man, the one everyone feared, was not whole. And broken power could be more dangerous than any cruelty. But morning came, and with it, the pretense of normal. The chandeliers glittered, the silver was polished, and the sister swept into the breakfast room with diamonds around her wrist. She looked at the maid as one might look at a piece of dirt that refused to be swept away. And with a laugh sharp enough to cut skin, she spoke about the shame of keeping charity cases under this roof. The father, rigid as a statue, agreed, saying the family's reputation demanded cleaner blood, cleaner service, cleaner silence. The maid bent her head, but her silence was not surrender. It was calculation. Quiet justice does not shout. It waits. And as she gathered the dishes, she caught the husband watching her again. His gaze lingered longer than a man's curiosity and shorter than a man's affection. It was the look of someone caught between duty and truth. That made him dangerous too, but dangerous in a way that might one day tip toward redemption or ruin. Now, viewers, let me pull you into this turning point with me. When the husband looked at her that morning, he did not see a maid. He saw something his family wanted destroyed, but could not explain why. That tension was the crack in the walls of their empire, and cracks, my friends, are where the light comes in. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. That same day, the maid discovered a letter left behind in the laundry chute, slipped between the linens. It was not hers, not meant for her eyes, but fate rarely cares about proper doors. The handwriting was bold, rushed, and carried the billionaire husband's name at the bottom. The words inside spoke of betrayal, of a deal hidden from the board, and of poison, not the kind that sits in a bottle, but the kind that slips quietly into a glass of trust. He had known of his family's plan to break her spirit, to erase her existence in this mansion, and he had signed his name to it. Yet in the last lines, he wrote of regret, of debts that could not be repaid, and of justice he feared was coming. The maid clutched that letter with trembling hands. Justice again. The word followed her like a shadow. Perhaps he too believed in quiet justice, though his version had been twisted by wealth and power. Still, the admission was enough to shake her resolve. Should she confront him? Should she expose him? Or should she wait and let the truth burn his empire from the inside out? The hours dragged, heavy with hidden choices. And when the evening came, the mansion prepared for a dinner with foreign investors. The hall was dressed in white roses, the silverware gleamed, and the air smelled of secrets masked with perfume. The sister wore crimson silk, her laughter filling the room like knives. The father's voice boomed with pride as he boasted of their fortune, their legacy, their power. And the husband sat at the head of the table, a king with a crown no one could see, while his eyes wandered again to the maid serving wine at his side. Every guest saw it. The glance. The pause. The weight of unspoken words. The sister's smile faltered, the father's hand clenched the stem of his glass. And the maid, heart-pounding, realized that she was no longer invisible. Her mere existence had become a threat. But what came next froze the air in the room. The sister, burning with rage, rose from her seat and grabbed the maid's hair again, dragging her into the light of the chandelier before everyone's eyes. She hissed words meant to humiliate, calling her worthless, calling her filth. The father rose too, his face thundercloud dark, and with one swift kick, he sent her sprawling against the floor tiles. The guests gasped, the investors whispered, and the weight of shame should have crushed her. Instead, it was the billionaire husband who stood. His chair scraped the marble, his hand slammed the table, and his voice cut through the laughter, the whispers, the cruelty. He turned to his family, to his sister, to his father, and what he said made the room fall into silence so sharp it hurt to breathe. And my dear viewers, it is here that the story shifts. For the husband's words were not what anyone expected. They were not of defense nor of denial. They carried a revelation that none in that room, not even the maid who thought she knew the shape of her pain, had ever imagined. Now I will leave you with this. What do you think he said that froze even the cruelest hearts at that table? What truth could break a family so powerful, yet bind the poor maid's fate forever to theirs? The chandelier light trembled as if it too feared what had been spoken. The guests leaned forward, their forks paused midair, wine glasses frozen inches from their lips. The maid, still on the cold marble floor, could feel her heart pounding so loudly she thought it would echo through the hall. The billionaire husband's words had not been shouted, but spoken with a low, steady power that made them impossible to ignore. He said, "Touch her again, and you are touching me, because she is not your servant. She is my wife." The room gasped, and the silence that followed was not the silence of disbelief, but of something deeper, shock so heavy it seemed to choke the very air. The sister's face drained of color, her hand still clutching strands of the maid's hair that slipped through her trembling fingers. The father's jaw tightened, his rage curdling into something he could not yet voice. And the maid, the maid lay frozen, unable to rise, unable to speak, because her ears could not believe what they had just heard. Wife. The word shattered every wall she had built to keep herself safe. She had known hunger, she had known humiliation, she had known betrayal, but never had she expected to hear that claim, not from him, not from anyone in this house. She was a maid. She was the one they had trampled and broken. And yet, in front of the most powerful men and women, he had placed her beside him with a single word. The guests began whispering. Some looked scandalized, others intrigued, and more than a few leaned in with the greedy hunger of those who thrive on watching empires crack. One woman, dressed in a silver gown, muttered loud enough for the table to hear, "So this is the hidden scandal. The marriage they tried to bury." Her words spread like wildfire, until the whole room hummed with rumor. The father slammed his hand on the table so hard the cutlery rattled. His voice, deep and venomous, tore through the whispers. "You dare shame this family with a servant? You dare throw away generations of blood for her?" He pointed at the maid, who was still trembling on the ground. Her palms pressed flat against the marble. "She is nothing. You were never meant for her." But the husband did not flinch. He turned, slowly, deliberately, and locked eyes with his father. And though his hands were clenched at his sides, his voice remained steady. "She is the only one who has ever seen me as more than money. She is the only one who saved me when I no longer wished to live. You, father, you saw a company. She saw a man. And there it was, the truth no one had expected. Because before that night, none of the guests knew of the rooftop, of the moment he had stood on the edge with despair in his chest, and of how the poor maid had pulled him back with nothing but her trembling hands and her stubborn belief that life could still mean something. Now, viewers, I want you to picture that revelation in your mind. A billionaire CEO, feared and admired by all, admitting that the one who saved him was the maid they despised. That is the kind of twist that unravels even the strongest chains of pride. The sister's lips curled into a smile, but not one of joy. It was the smile of someone cornered, someone who had been dealt a blow but refused to surrender. "So this is your rebellion," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Parading your maid as your wife. Do you think these people will respect you now? Do you think the investors will stay?" She looked around the table, searching for allies, and for a moment she found silence. But then the silver-gowned woman spoke again. "Respect," she said with a raised brow. "I see no shame in a man defending his wife. In fact, I see strength. What I see shame in is a family dragging a woman by her hair at a dinner table." Her words drew nods, quiet but unmistakable. A shift had begun. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. enjoy the story." The father's face turned red with fury, the veins in his temples throbbing. He rose to his full height, towering over his son, and for the first time in years, he raised his hand, not in discipline, not in command, but in pure rage. The maid flinched, certain a blow was coming, but it never landed. The billionaire husband caught his father's wrist mid-air, holding it with an iron grip. And the room, once again, froze. "You will not strike her," he said, his voice low but deadly. "You will not strike me. Not any more." The father tried to wrench free, but the son's grip only tightened. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, two generations of power clashed, the old king who ruled with fear, and the new one who had finally found something worth protecting. The maid rose slowly, her body trembling, her breath shallow. She had no words, no strength to interrupt, but her presence alone seemed to fuel the husband's defiance. And when he finally released his father's hand, the elder staggered back, his pride bruised more deeply than his flesh. The guests shifted uncomfortably, torn between loyalty to a dynasty and awe at its unraveling. The sister whispered something to a man at the far end of the table, and though the words were too quiet to hear, the intent in her eyes was sharp as a knife. The maid knew then that this was not the end. Her humiliation had been turned into a weapon she never asked for. Her existence was no longer a secret, but a war. And though the husband had defended her tonight, his family would not stop until they buried the truth, or her. As she stood in the center of that grand hall, the chandeliers glittering above her and the whispers swirling like smoke, she realized that she was now standing at the edge of a battle she could neither escape nor refuse. And the next strike, she feared, would not be with words or with kicks, but with something far darker. The night ended not with applause nor with reconciliation, but with silence heavy enough to crush. And in that silence, the maid asked herself one question. Had she truly been saved by his words, or had he just painted a target on her back so large the whole world would now take aim? The dinner ended like a storm breaking apart. No resolution, no peace, only destruction scattered across the room. Guests slipped away quickly, murmuring into their phones, some with smirks, others with worry. Deals were being renegotiated in whispers before the last glass of wine had even been cleared. The silver-gowned woman, the one who had spoken in her defense, gave the maid a lingering glance as she left, a look that seemed to say, "You have no idea what you've stepped into." The father vanished behind closed doors, his pride so torn it was dangerous. The sister, however, lingered at the edge of the hall, her smile sharp and deliberate. She did not need to shout. She did not need to rage. The look in her eyes was enough to tell the maid that revenge had already begun forming like poison in a glass. The maid found herself standing alone near the long dining table, the smell of roasted meat and spilled wine clinging to the air, when the billionaire husband finally touched her shoulder. His hand was warm, firm, grounding. "Come with me," he said quietly, as though the walls themselves were listening. She followed him through the winding halls of the mansion until they reached the library, a room lined with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, heavy with the scent of old leather and dust. He closed the doors behind them, shutting out the echo of whispers, and for the first time that night, he looked, not like a CEO, not like a son defying his father, but like a man stripped bare. "Forgive me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't plan to say it tonight. Not like that. But when his jaw clenched, when she dragged you by your hair, I couldn't stay silent." The maid lowered her gaze. Her heart still raced from the humiliation, from the fury, from the sudden revelation of being declared his wife. She wanted to believe his words, to let them wrap around her like armor. But fear pressed against her chest harder than hope. "They will come for me," she whispered. "Your sister, your father, they won't forgive this." "They don't need to forgive it," he replied sharply. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Let them rage. Let them scheme. I will not let them harm you. Not again." His conviction was fire, but she had lived long enough among shadows to know fire also burns those closest to it. Before she could speak again, a sharp knock rattled the library door. The billionaire's eyes narrowed. He opened it to find the butler standing there, face pale, voice low. "Sir, Your father requests your presence. Urgently. In the study. The husband's expression hardened. Tell him I'll come when I choose. But the butler did not move. His silence was enough. The father was not asking. He was summoning. The husband turned back to the maid. His hand brushed her cheek, softer now, gentler. Stay here. No matter what you hear, do not leave this room. And then he was gone. The maid stood alone, the walls of the library pressing in around her. She paced between the shelves, her fingers brushing the spines of books she could not read, her thoughts spiraling. Wife. The father raised a hand, silencing the argument. No, he said. She has to choose. Silence is still a choice. So tell us, girl, which is it? The walls seemed to lean in, the air growing heavier. Every eye in the room bore into her like blades. She felt herself shrinking, a maid once more, not a wife, not a woman, just a shadow at the mercy of giants. But beneath the fear, something stirred. A small ember, faint but steady. She thought of the night on the rooftop, the night she pulled the billionaire from the edge. That moment when he was broken, when she alone had held his life in her hands. She hadn't chosen then because of power or wealth. She had chosen because she couldn't let another soul fall. And now, wasn't this the same choice? Her fingers tightened around his. Her back straightened. And when she finally spoke, her voice, though trembling, carried something new, something firm. You say I'll destroy him. But you're wrong. You've already destroyed him. Every threat, every chain you've wrapped around his life, every time you've forced him to kneel before your rules, none of that is love. And none of that is family. The sister's smirk faltered. The father's eyes narrowed. But the husband's grip on her hand grew stronger. She continued, her words tumbling faster now, sharper, as though the ember inside her had burst into flame. I am not leaving. Not for money, not for freedom, not for you. If you strip him of everything, then we will start again. Together. I would rather stand in the ruins with him than live in your palace of cruelty. The father's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists on the desk. For the first time, she thought she saw something crack in his expression. Was it rage? Or fear? The sister hissed, venom dripping from her voice. You'll regret this. You'll drag him into the gutter, and when he hates you for it, I'll be the one laughing. The husband turned, his voice thunderous. If you think I'll ever hate her, then you don't know me at all. The room trembled with silence after that, the kind of silence that comes just before a storm breaks. The father rose slowly from his chair. So be it, he said, each word heavy as stone. You've chosen war. And war is what you'll have. The sister's smile returned, thin and cruel. Tick-tock, maid. Let's see how long you last. The maid's heart pounded, but she did not look away. For the first time, she met their eyes without flinching. The war had begun. But little did she know, the first blow was already waiting at the door, an unexpected visitor carrying a secret that would shatter everything she thought she knew about the man she had vowed to stand beside. The knock at the door was not loud, but it echoed like a hammer strike in the charged silence. Every head turned. The father frowned, the sister's smirk faltered, and the husband's grip on his wife's hand tightened until her knuckles turned white. A servant slipped inside, eyes low, voice trembling. Sir, there's someone here. He says it's urgent. The father waved a dismissive hand. Send him away. We are not to be disturbed. But before the servant could obey, the door swung open wider, and a tall man stepped in uninvited. His coat was dark, his face lean, his eyes sharp as knives. He carried an envelope in one hand, and the way he walked, calm, deliberate, as though the room already belonged to him, sent a ripple of unease through everyone present. The father's voice hardened. Who are you? The stranger ignored him. Instead, he looked straight at the billionaire's wife, the poor maid who had become the center of this storm. His gaze held hers, steady and unsettling, before shifting to the husband. Finally, he placed the envelope on the desk with a quiet thud. You should read this, he said simply. The husband frowned. "What is it?" The stranger leaned back, his lips curving in the faintest shadow of a smile. "Proof of a betrayal buried so deep even you don't see it yet." The sister scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Another charlatan. Throw him out, father." But the father's instincts were sharper than his daughter's arrogance. His eyes narrowed, studying the man, the envelope, the stillness that hung like smoke in the air. With slow, deliberate fingers, he reached for the letter and tore it open. The paper inside was brief. Only a few lines. But as the father read, his face drained of color. His hand trembled slightly before he slammed the letter down on the desk, his glare turning on his son. "You," his voice cracked, then steadied, louder, harsher. "You have been living a lie." The room tilted, confusion spreading like wildfire. The maid leaned forward, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" The father jabbed a finger at the letter. "That woman you protect so fiercely, she's not who she claims to be." Her breath caught, her pulse hammering in her ears. The sister burst out laughing, clapping her hands like she had just won a prize. "I knew it! I knew she was a fraud." The husband's voice thundered, shaking the walls. "Stop it! If this is some twisted ploy to tear us apart." But the stranger cut him off, his tone cold, cutting. "It's not a ploy. The woman you married, she's carrying a truth that's been hidden since the day she was born. And that truth ties her bloodline directly to yours." The maid froze, her skin prickling, her body suddenly weightless. What are you saying?" The stranger's eyes locked on hers, unflinching. "I'm saying the man you saved on the rooftop, the man you now call husband, is not the first billionaire in this house tied to you. Another one already is. Your father." The words struck like lightning. The room gasped as one. The maid stumbled back, her hand slipping from her husband's. Her chest burned, her vision blurred. Could it be true? Could she really be the daughter of the very man who had kicked her, despised her, and treated her as less than dirt? The husband's face twisted in shock, denial written across his features. The sister's laughter turned shrill, cruel, triumphant. And the father, he stood frozen, jaw tight, eyes darting, his silence speaking more than words ever could. The maid's world tilted, everything she thought she knew cracking apart in a single, unbearable instant. But the stranger was not done. His voice dropped lower, colder. "And this, dear child, is only the beginning. The truth runs deeper than you imagine. Much deeper." The room erupted like a storm breaking. The sister's laughter rang shrill and venomous, while the father barked at the stranger to leave. Servants shuffled at the edges, uncertain whether to intervene or vanish into the shadows. Husband slammed his fist on the desk, his rage barely contained. But the poor maid, the woman whose entire world had just been shattered, stood utterly still, her body trembling yet her eyes wide open, as though she were seeing everything in the house for the very first time. She whispered, barely audible, "My father?" The stranger turned his gaze to her again, steady, merciless. "Yes. The man who kicked you, humiliated you, treated you as if you were less than nothing, is the one whose blood runs in your veins." Her knees weakened, and she gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. The husband moved toward her, reaching for her shoulder, but she flinched away. For the first time, she wasn't sure whose touch she could accept. The father roared, his face flushed red with fury. "Lies! Fabricated nonsense! Do not poison this household with your tricks." The stranger said nothing, only reached into his coat again and drew out another envelope, thicker this time, heavier, sealed in wax. He laid it beside the first letter and tapped it with his finger. "DNA doesn't lie," he said. "And the results are in here. You can deny words, but numbers carve the truth into stone." The father's eyes flickered. Just for a moment. A flicker of fear, so small most people would have missed it. But she saw it. The maid saw it. And it cut her deeper than any insult ever had. Her voice broke as she asked, "All these years, you knew?" The father's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence can scream louder than thunder. The sister stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. So what if it's true? It changes nothing. She's still a maid. She's still beneath us. Blood doesn't wash away the filth she came from. The husband turned sharply, his voice like a blade. Enough. His glare sliced into his sister, silencing her mockery. Then he turned back to his wife, his hand reaching once more for hers. Whatever the truth is, it doesn't change what you mean to me. It doesn't change who you are in my eyes. But she was too stunned to respond. Too broken between two impossible truths, the man she loved vowing to stand beside her, and the man who despised her standing revealed as her father. The stranger's voice rose once more, calm yet cutting through the chaos. There is more to uncover. Documents. Witnesses. Hidden accounts that will strip bare every lie in this house. But before I reveal them, he pointed directly at the maid, must decide. Does she want to know everything? Or will she walk away now, clinging to fragments of the life she thought she had? The room went still again. The air thickened, heavy as iron. All eyes turned to her, the woman who had once been invisible, now standing at the center of a storm too great to escape. Her lips parted, her heart racing. She wanted to scream, to run, to collapse into the floor. But she couldn't. Not now. She raised her head slowly, her eyes glistening but burning with a strength no one in that room expected. I will know, she whispered, her voice trembling yet resolute. I want the truth. Every piece of it. Even if it destroys me. The stranger nodded once, almost with respect. Then, as if sensing the weight of what was about to come, he added one final warning. The truth will not only destroy lies. It will burn bridges, expose betrayals, and uncover sins too dark to be forgiven. When I open what I have, no one in this room will walk away untouched. The father paled. The sister clenched her fists. The husband's grip on her hand grew fierce. And the maid, standing tall despite the quake in her heart, waited for the storm she had just chosen to unleash. The stranger broke the seal. And the world, as they knew it, began to unravel.